Hello, I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. This series of podcasts is aimed at financial planning professionals and also those who are looking to enter the financial planning profession. We will be talking during the podcast about all things Certified Financial Planner certification related, talking to other CFPs around the world, and also we will be dropping in on some new entrants who've just entered the financial planning profession, and we'll be checking up along the way on a regular basis with them to see how they're getting on. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm Jackie Lucky, your financial planning maestro. And today I am joined by a very special person who is a newly qualified certified financial planner, and that is David Burgess from Bloomsbury Wealth. Hello, David.
Hi, Jackie.
Welcome to the show. And today we are going to talk all about your journey to obtaining your certified financial planner license, aren't we?
Yep, sounds good.
So, let's start at the very beginning and tell me how you got into the financial planning profession.
Basically, what happened was I had been to see a few financial advisors with my mum. One was during the global financial crisis when she asked me to have a look at the portfolio and to meet the advisor. And it was once the portfolio had fallen by 40%, and she'd been happy with him up until that point because I think it had done okay. And then all of a sudden, when things went bad, she got really worried. I met with him. She hadn't really been getting financial advice. It was more just he was managing the investment portfolio. I was working at Mitsubishi at the time, so I was kind of in finance, which is probably why my mum asked me to have a look. And I just saw a list of names that I'd never heard of. It seemed pretty risky. And so she ended up liquidating, which ended up being pretty much at the bottom of the market, which I now know is the sort of big mistake. But of course, at the time, I didn't know that. So I guess that was my first experience of, let's call it, financial advice. And then what happened was, when I was doing my MBA a long time later, my stepfather sadly passed away, and my mum then sort of had some money that, again, she was looking to invest. This was many years later. And so this time we went to see quite a number of advisors. We met with some IFAs, and we also met with someone from St. James's Place. And basically, we were more impressed by the advisor that we met at St. James's Place than with the others. And it so happened, it's a bit of a coincidence, really, that I think that night I was at a bar with a friend, and I was speaking to the friend's father, and the friend's father was head of business development for the city office of St. James's Place. Mm-hmm. And I just met with an advisor from St. James's Place. And I can't remember how the conversation started, but we started talking about it. And it was only then that I understood what the business model was at SJP. The fact that you can basically set up your own business underneath this huge brand, FTSE 100 company. And he just made it sound like a very attractive opportunity. And because I was on my MBA in Barcelona, I was really thinking seriously about what to do next, and I still hadn't figured that out. I decided to interview with St. James's Place, and it was actually the only firm I interviewed with in wealth management. I wasn't sort of interested in any other job within it. I probably would have done something different, actually, I think, if it hadn't have been for the fact that they offered me a place at St. James's Place. And so that's how I kind of got into the profession. And what I would say is I sort of became passionate about financial planning whilst I was at SJP, because it became quite clear to me that actually the best advisors there, especially the best newer advisors, they were all doing financial planning. Mm-hmm. Whether they were doing it to the standards that some are, I don't know, probably not. But they were using Voyant, they were trying to do financial planning, and it was quite clear to me that that was the direction of travel, and that wasn't something I'd ever experienced before. So that's kind of that's how I got into it. It was from joining SJP.
And then obviously you're not at SJP anymore. So there must have come a point where you wanted to change and you looked elsewhere for positions available at were they at more specialized financial planning firms? And what was the reason that you did that?
So what happened is when I was at SJP, I started reading lots of investment books, which I hadn't done before joining. And the more I read, the more I got interested in it. And it became quite clear to me that, very, very few active managers outperform the market. It's very difficult to identify them in advance. So I started becoming convinced, really, that the St. James's Place approach to investment management was highly unlikely to deliver better performance than just investing in sort of a passive fund.
Yeah.
And so it was a combination of me sort of not really believing in the investment approach, combined with the fact that I didn't like the fee structure. I wasn't comfortable with the initial or the exit fees. And so I didn't charge any of those with the clients that I did bring on board. And so as a result, it sort of didn't really get paid. And I just felt that the business model didn't really suit me. I sort of asked myself the question, I thought forwards 10, 15, 20 years. And I thought, if I had all of my family, all of my friends, everyone I know as a client here, would I feel that I've brought them to the best possible, let's call it, platform? And the answer to that was no. And once I'd come to that conclusion, I realized that I had to leave. And what I did was, I think I read, one of the books I read was Tim Hale's Smarter Investing, and I think I learned about dimensional through that book. I can't quite remember, but I definitely learned about dimensional, and I started to think, and I think, Carl Richards talks about them, and I was reading quite a bit, I was following quite a few blogs, and it became clear to me that dimensional was sort of an asset manager that was sort of, that was worth exploring further. And so I just called them. And I said to them, look, I'm thinking of leaving St. James's Place. I'm interested in your investment approach. I would like to know which firms you work with in the UK, because I want to join one of those firms. And they were very kind and gave me a list of 8 firms in the UK that would be prepared to talk to me. I think I had to send them my CV and stuff. And then I spoke to those, and Bloomsbury was one of those firms. Wow. And so that's how I joined Bloomsbury.
Excellent. Right. And I guess the rest is history, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So far, so good.
So far, so good. Excellent. That's good to hear. So once you arrived at Bloomsbury Wealth, then is that when you first came in contact with the certified financial planner? And then at what point did you say, right, I need to get on with it and achieve it myself?
No, so when I was at SJP, I think within my first year, I was already speaking to sort of the head of business development and saying, look, I think I should probably be getting chartered status, because the types of clients that I want to go after are probably going to shortlist people on the basis that they have to be as qualified as you can get. And at the time, because SJP's focus is so much on business development, which makes sense, because as an advisor there, if you don't bring on board clients, you don't get paid, and so you can't feed yourself. He sort of advised me to wait and to focus on the business development stuff first. And what then happened was, as I was following these sort of bloggers, let's say, the Ritholtz crew and Carl Richards, Michael Kitzers, those types of people, it just became very clear to me that in the US, everyone who was talking about financial planning had the CFP. Yeah. So I then started to think, well, actually, if I'm good, and so then I looked into what the CFP was, and it became clear that it was kind of, the gold standard of excellence really in the financial planning profession. So I then thought to myself, well, actually, rather than going for chartered status, which only really applies to the UK, I might as well go for the global sort of the global standard, which is CFP. And actually, before leaving SJP, I spoke to the head of training and development there, and I said to him, look, if you were in my shoes and you were thinking, chartered or CFP, I was just trying to find out more from him what the CFP process looked like to get it, because I didn't really know that at that point. And basically, not only did he sort of tell me what the process looked like and the training that was out there, but he also just said to me, if I was in your shoes, I would do CFP, because it actually, the process that you have to go through to get it really is kind of what financial planning looks like, whereas chartered is more passing sort of technical exams on various modules that apply to wealth management. So that's why I then decided. So I'd actually made the decision that I wanted to do the CFP before joining Bloomsbury. So the fact that at Bloomsbury you kind of have to have the CFP in order to be an advisor, that was fine by me, because that had been my plan anyway.
Yeah, excellent. Well, yeah. So let's talk about your journey to gaining your CFP. What was the first step? Because obviously you were qualified to level 4. Did you have to sit the level 6 exam?
So I did. I sat the level 6 exam, and I actually got some help for that as well. So I think it was Glasgow Consulting.
Yep.
I think it was sort of a couple of sessions that I did with him, and with a few other people. It was kind of an online course, and I found that helpful. I've sort of always been one of these people that when there's help, when there's help available, I like to explore that help, because it can be a big time saver.
Yeah.
And so I found it useful. I then did the 3-hour exam, which I didn't find it easy. I didn't find it hard, compared obviously to the case study, which I found a lot harder, and which I think help was really, really necessary. But, I got the help. I thought the course was good. I passed the exam, no problem. And then with the level 7 case study, as you know, Jackie, I joined your online course immediately. Because I knew, I was told very clearly, really, that the level 7 case study was very difficult, and it was worth getting help for that. Whereas with the exam, some people said you probably don't need the help, and some people said, well, it can't hurt. So I went for the help. Yeah. And if for me, I don't think I would have passed it. I mean, I'm sure I wouldn't have passed it if it wasn't for the help. So I think for the level 7 case study, it's a massive time saver. So I definitely would recommend it to anyone listening.
And so, you passed your level 6, you went straight on, didn't you? Got your level 7 case study and dived headlong in. So, well, actually, as I recall, did you do that, or did you kind of got the course, looked at the information, and then got your case study, I think?
So I think, I don't think I did it immediately, and I think it was just a case of I had some sort of summer plans, so I didn't feel that I would be able to dedicate the time that was required over the summer months to doing it. So I think I skipped. So I think I got my exam result, and then there was an option to do it pretty quickly to start doing it, and I think I delayed it a little bit. Yeah. But what I did was I joined your online course, and I think it's really crucial to have a framework for how to tackle it, because otherwise, I didn't have any experience of trying it without having a framework. And I guess, I've listened to some of your other blogs from people who've done the CFP who maybe didn't get the help immediately. And they can, they talk a little bit about what it was like for them. But for me, without having had that framework of how to tackle it, I just probably would have gone at it from the wrong. I would have done things in the wrong order. And I think if I'd done things in the wrong order, it just would have taken me more time, been more challenging than it already was. Yeah. So I think having the framework, which you clearly outline in your course of, what to do in what order, was extremely valuable. So I again really do recommend that, because otherwise what you have is a case study, and you have an idea of how long this report is going to be, which is kind of 60 pages. And you it's hard to know where to start. Yes, it is. So I think without any help, I think it's challenging enough with help. I think without help, it's extremely difficult.
I did speak to somebody who posted on LinkedIn a few weeks ago that they had finally, I think, very exasperatingly and finally passed their level 7 to gain their CFP. And I thought, oh, I don't recognize that person. So I congratulated them on LinkedIn. And then they messaged me back and said, Jackie, I meant to say that I did it just using your free information on your website, but it was the most painful thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And I wish that I'd done the course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it's a real no-brainer because of the amount of time it saves.
Yep. Let's dive into the detail of how you got on with the case study and tell us a little bit about, your individual approach and were there particular areas of building your financial plan that you struggled with?
Yeah. So for me, actually, the thing that I struggled with the most was building the Excel spreadsheets, because I'd never really used Excel much. And it's sort of, on the MBA, I was known as the person who would outsource all the Excel work to the others. And then I'd be happy to present the results to the room. So while some people find presenting quite scary and don't want to do that side of things, I was happy to do that, provided I didn't have to build the spreadsheets. And it sort of came back to bite me a little bit when I had to do the CFP. So for me, that was the biggest challenge. But it definitely wasn't the only challenge. And, again, it's quite hard because I did the course and I had the guidance of how to tackle it and in what order to tackle the various areas. I don't know how I would have approached it without that. But so it was I guess for me, the biggest challenges are for me, it was Excel and how to build those spreadsheets. And I got lost in the spreadsheet at one point and got really stuck and then couldn't fix the problem without help, which you helped me with. But then it's also a case of you've got these various areas that you need to think about. So you need to think about kind of protection and retirement and estate planning. And I think that combined with the spreadsheets and doing the things in the right order is really important, because otherwise I could see how you could get very frustrated.
Yeah.
Because as you say, it's kind of this big puzzle that you need to kind of, you need to fit it together. Yeah. And if you don't do things in the right order, I imagine solving that puzzle is all the more challenging.
It is indeed. It's my famous 3D jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? That people are sick and tired of me talking about over the years now. But it's very true. And I think also that kind of being able to understand what the numbers are doing in your spreadsheets, so that when you move on to the second objective and then the other subsequent objectives, because obviously in this case study you're tackling 4 major objectives of the client in one great big go, aren't you? Which actually in real life, you probably don't do that on a regular basis, do you?
No, exactly. And then you've got so many spreadsheets that that kind of are linked to other spreadsheets. And if you don't know how to structure that well, I would imagine you end up getting in a complete muddle. Again, I think for anyone who's not confident on Excel, I mean, you walk through this on your online course, and I think that's very helpful. And for some people that would be enough. But for me, because I did get so stuck and I couldn't get myself unstuck, I then personally found that doing kind of the one-on-one bit with you was, made all the difference for me. And I don't think I would have been able to do it without that. The first step is getting the framework and knowing how to structure the spreadsheets. And I think you get that from the online course. But then every case is different, obviously. Mm-hmm. And if you do end up getting stuck, I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours trying to unravel some mistakes in my spreadsheet. And I just was getting more and more stuck, more and more frustrated, and it was wasting time. And I, if you get to that point, I really do think it's worth, if someone does your course, it's worth reaching out to you about that, because again, for me, that was super helpful.
You need the help, don't you? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And so, after all that, you got there in the end. You sent in your first submission. Did you pass on your first submission?
No, so my first submission was actually sort of semi-complete. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to pass, which was a good thing because I wasn't sort of disheartened when I got the results back, which were, terrible. Because all I did was I submitted the introduction and the assumptions, and that was it. So there was no spreadsheets because at that point I'd been so stuck that I couldn't, there was nothing to submit really.
Yeah.
So I just sent that just because I wanted to submit something. You need to submit something, I think, in order to then have another go at it.
You do.
But I also wanted to just get those sections checked to see whether those sections were okay, because then it just meant maybe that I'd have less work to do for the second submission.
Yeah.
So I didn't pass the first time, and I was very surprised to pass the second time, actually. But very, very happy to pass. I can tell you that. Very happy. And yeah, it's the reason that I was surprised that I passed was, I guess, you're told you need to pass. I think what is it, 65% overall, yes. And it's quite hard to know what that looks like. What does the 65% pass mark look like? And I just knew that, that it was by no means perfect, my report, and I felt that it could have been improved, but I just ran out of time. Really, in the end, I spent many, many hours on it. So when I submitted it, I thought, well, it could pass, which was important. I thought it could pass, but I didn't want to get my hopes up, I guess, and I just thought it wouldn't. And then I thought I'd be down to the third submission, which I thought it's kind of which is really where you don't want to be, because I think then if you do not pass, you have to start the whole thing all over again with a new case.
Yeah.
So I was very relieved.
I think time management is one of the key aspects with this. And, it is level 7. So it's a bit like doing, it's the same level as a master's degree. Yeah. And, with that, again, it's all about time management and, 10 weeks, which you've got to complete your financial plan. It runs away with you. But I think particularly if you struggle in different areas, then you go down these rabbit holes, don't you? And you're kind of never seen again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the challenge that I had was, I came back to it at the very beginning of that 10-week, or I think it was 12-week window actually for the second submission. So I had a little bit more time, which was nice. But I then went back to my spreadsheet and I went back to your course and redid the whole course again, and then went to the spreadsheet and tried to figure out where I had gone wrong. And I spent weeks trying to do it myself. And actually, I think it was about a month before the second submission that I actually got in touch with you and said, look, I'm totally stuck and I really need some help with the spreadsheet. And you then suggested that we have a one-on-one session. Yeah. And that sort of got me unstuck. And then I was in such a race against time because it's a 60-page report and I'd written just the introduction and the assumptions bit. And so I had to basically write the whole thing. So I was in a real race against time at the end. And if I could rewind, I would have contacted you sooner in that second submission window when I knew I was stuck, and I would have had that session with you sooner, because then I would have been under less pressure. But it is what it is. And
it is what it is.
It is what it is. And, on the plus side, I think I did get help very soon. I mean, I signed up to your course before doing the first submission. And just for me personally, I think it really makes all the difference doing that, because it's really, really challenging. It takes a lot of time. And so I really do recommend it to anyone. And anyone that I do speak to, I do say, do the course, do the course, do the course.
Thank you. That's another 50 quid I owe you. Thanks very much. So talking of hours, do you have a rough feel for how long this whole shebang took you to get through the level 7 case study, including both submissions?
Okay, so how many hours was it that you said? Did you say 100 hours roughly?
I think about 150, yeah.
150, okay. I remember Chris Morris, I think, saying at the CISI that it was around 200 hours. It was what he'd recommend. You're just quite fast, Jackie. I would say it took me probably 200 hours on each submission. but I'm a bit slow. Well, I'm not a bit slow. Maybe I'm about average. I don't know. I would say that it can easily take 200 hours. And so that's how much time I would allocate. Better to err on the side of caution.
And I think, people learn in different ways. And like you were saying, when you get stuck on something, sometimes you can unravel yourself and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you get in deeper. And so you can't know just from looking at the case study, how it's all going to pan out. So, I guess it's back to that time management again, isn't it? That if you plan your time, a little bit better, maybe like you were saying, if you had your time again, then actually, you would have, maybe if you had your time again, you have done more on your first submission to make relieve the pressure a little bit more for that second submission, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always makes sense to err on the side of caution. And in your mind, if you're sort of planning out your timetable, thinking to yourself it's going to take longer, so I would allocate 200 hours, and for me, it takes as long as it takes. And I think if you want to look after kind of complex clients and you want to get to the top of of this profession, I don't see how you can do that without getting it.
No.
So for me, it's kind of it's almost kind of just to get you started. I think Rob said to me after I'd passed, when I was kind of elated about it, he said, it's a bit like passing your driving test, getting the CFP. You've passed your test. It doesn't mean you're a good driver. And I do think that he's right. For me, it's like, it's kind of, you need to get it because that kind of allows you to get into the game, let's call it that. Yeah. But then to become a really good financial planner, I think takes a lot of experience, takes a lot of practice. So it's just the beginning, really.
Yeah. I think my dad said to me when I passed my driving test, now you can learn to drive.
Exactly.
So it's a bit like that, isn't it?
I know, exactly. And,
So now you have there's been a few months now since between receiving your result and jumping up and down in the office. And, you've had a little bit of time to digest all of the journey. Looking back now, has it changed you as a financial planner, the way that you help clients, the way that you approach the situation with clients? Have you used that knowledge to, improve business processes at Bloomsbury? So
what I would say is, because I'm at Bloomsbury and Bloomsbury really do follow the kind of 6-step CFP process, I would say that it hasn't really changed the way I approach things, because I was introduced to this way of solving these problems from the moment I joined Bloomsbury, and it's one of the reasons I joined. So I would say in my case, it hasn't really changed the way that I think about financial planning, because I was thrust into a system which very much does financial planning the proper way. But I guess if I hadn't have been at Bloomsbury, and let's say I'd still been at SJP, then it would have been very different from what I'd experienced up until that point. So I'd say, if you're already working at a financial planning firm which really does follow the CFP process, which Bloomsbury does, I think it helps to complement that, but it doesn't necessarily shift or change your perspective. It just helps you maybe to appreciate why they do things in certain ways if you hadn't appreciated it before that.
Yeah.
But I think, absolutely. But I think for most people, because the way that I see, people sort of talk about financial planning and financial advice and separate them. For me, financial planning is simply financial advice done right. I think it's, if you want to give someone thorough, personalized financial advice, there's no better way of doing that than building a financial plan for them, and by going through the financial planning process, because ultimately what it requires is a thorough evaluation of their circumstances, their needs, and their objectives. And once you get all that information, you're then in a position to give them far better, far more customized advice. So for me, it's just financial advice done right. And I do feel that the direction of travel in the wealth management profession, as more broadly, is in that direction, because more and more people realize that asset management has become, a commodity for the most part. So,
Yes.
So I think for most people who let's maybe in the industry, and maybe for those who aren't already working for a financial planning firm, CFP through and through, like Bloomsbury, I think going through that process would open their eyes to a way of giving financial advice that's maybe more thorough and more customized than they've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so I would really recommend it. I would recommend going through that process. Yeah.
And we're nearly out of time already. So let me just finish by asking you one last question, if I may. If you had somebody in front of you who was thinking about starting their journey to gaining their CFP certification today, do you have any advice or tips for them?
I do, and just to be clear, I'm not being paid by Jackie to say this, but I did have this question before, and all I wrote down was get help, get help, get help, and I really do think that will save so much time, and it really made the difference for me. And the other thing that I also did was I did listen to the podcast episodes, the Financial Planning Maestro podcast episodes with those who just done it as well. And I wrote down all the tips that they gave, which also helped when I was sort of submitting my plan. So that's what I would do. I would, just get as much help as you can. It really is a challenging, it's really challenging. And yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Challenging, but worthwhile in the end.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Right, David, that's all we have time for today. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
It's really interesting, isn't it, to listen to different people who have different experiences of gaining their certified financial planner certification, or maybe developing the financial planning profession at large. If you know anybody who you think might be interested in listening to any of these podcasts, then please do pass on our details. That's it for me. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. See you again soon. Bye for now.